The farm sat on open land that had been quiet for a very long time. Long before neat streets and matching mailboxes showed up nearby, the land had already been worked by the same family for generations. It was not fancy land. It was practical land. Wide fields stretched out under the sky. Old fences leaned but still held. A farmhouse stood near the road, worn but strong, with marks of repairs made over many decades. Every corner of the place held memories, even if no one wrote them down. The family did not move there for peace and quiet. They were already there before peace and quiet became something people paid for. The farm had been bought when the nearest town was small and far away. Back then, the land was cheap because no one thought it would ever be valuable. The family thought differently. They planted crops, raised animals, and built a life that depended on the seasons. Trends each year followed the same steady rhythm. Mornings began early. The sound of machinery was normal, not noise. The smell of soil and feed was part of daily life. Trucks came and went. Animals were moved. Crops were harvested and stored. Nothing about the work was fast or easy, but it was honest. The land provided enough, and that was always enough for the family. For decades, nothing around the farm changed much. A few new houses appeared here and there, but they were spaced far apart. Neighbors waved from the road. Everyone understood that farms came with dust, noise, and long days. No one complained because no one expected the farm to be anything else. That began to change when developers showed interest in the nearby land. One summer, heavy machines arrived on property just beyond the fields. Trees were cleared. Roads were cut into the ground. Signs went up showing pictures of bright houses that did not exist yet. Words like community and luxury living appeared on large boards along the road. The family watched it all from a distance. Development was not new, and it had never bothered them much. Landowners had the right to sell, and builders had the right to build. As long as no one touched the farm, there was no reason to worry. But this development was different. It moved fast. Within a year, rows of identical houses stood where open land used to be. Sidewalks appeared. Streetlights glowed at night. A large stone sign was placed at the entrance of the neighborhood, showing the name of the new community in clean, sharp letters. Soon after, cars filled the streets. New families moved in. Many of them had never lived near a working farm before. Some waved politely. Others stared. A few complained quietly to each other about smells or sounds. Still, nothing was said directly to the farm. The family continued working as they always had. Crops were planted. Equipment was repaired. Animals were cared for. The land did not change just because houses were built nearby. Then the letters started. The first envelope looked official, but harmless. It came from a homeowners association connected to the new neighborhood. The family almost threw it away, thinking it was sent by mistake. They did not own a home in that development. They did not use its roads, parks, or services. There was no reason for the letter to matter. Out of curiosity, they opened it. The letter claimed the farm was now within the boundaries of the homeowners association. It welcomed them as members and explained monthly fees, rules, and expectations. It spoke about maintaining community standards, shared responsibilities, and neighborhood appearance. The family laughed at first. It sounded ridiculous. The farm had been there long before the neighborhood existed. No one had ever asked permission to farm the land. No one had mentioned boundaries changing. Surely this was an error. They set the letter aside and went back to work. A few weeks later, another letter arrived. This one was firmer. It included a statement showing unpaid fees going back several months. It warned that failure to pay could result in penalties. The tone was polite but serious. This time the family did not laugh. They read the letter carefully. It listed rules that made no sense for a farm. Restrictions on noise, limits on vehicle parking, rules about animals, guidelines for landscaping and fencing. According to the document, none of these rules were optional. The family felt confusion more than anger. They had never agreed to any of this. No one had contacted them before. There had been no meeting, no discussion, no notice of any kind. They assumed the matter could be cleared up with a simple phone call. When they called the number on the letter, they reached a representative who spoke in rehearsed phrases. The representative insisted the farm was part of the association. When asked how that could be true, the answer was vague. The boundaries had been updated. The documents were filed. Membership was automatic. The family explained the farm's history. They explained that the land was not part of the development. They explained that they did not want or need HOA services. None of it seemed to matter. The representative repeated the same message: fees were due, and rules must be followed. That was the moment the family realized. This was not a simple mistake. They began searching through old records stored in cabinets and boxes. Deeds, surveys, and maps showed the farm clearly separated from surrounding properties. Nothing suggested the land had ever been transferred or included in any association. Everything pointed to one truth: the farm stood alone. At the same time, the neighborhood around them continued to grow. More houses were built. More people moved in. Some residents began walking near the farm, stopping to take pictures or complain under their breath. A few even approached the family, asking questions about smells, early morning noise, or animals visible from their backyards. The family answered politely. They explained that it was a working farm, that it had always been that way, that nothing had changed except the neighborhood. Some neighbors understood, others did not. Then a third letter arrived. This one was no longer friendly. It listed unpaid fees, late charges, and warnings of legal action. It stated that continued refusal to comply could lead to further consequences. The message was clear. The HOA expected obedience. The family felt something shift inside them. This was no longer about paperwork. It was about control. They stood together in the farmhouse kitchen, reading the letter aloud. The table bore marks from years of use. Outside, fields waited for attention. Work still needed to be done. The land did not care about letters or threats, but the family did. They knew the farm was their livelihood. It was also their identity. Allowing an outside group to dictate how the land could be used was not just unreasonable. It was impossible. They decided not to ignore the problem anymore. If the HOA wanted to push this issue, the family would be ready. They would gather every document. They would ask questions. They would defend what had been theirs long before anyone else arrived, as the sun set behind the fields. The farmhouse lights came on. The land rested for the night, unaware that a quiet farm was about to become the center of a conflict. No one had expected. What started as a simple letter had now become a warning. And though the HOA did not realize it yet, demanding fees from a farm that predated their entire neighborhood was about to become the worst decision they ever made. The days after the third letter felt heavier than usual. The farm work stayed the same, but the mood did not. Every task carried a quiet tension, like something unseen was standing just beyond the fence line. The family kept moving because farms do not stop for stress. But the letters sat on the kitchen table as a constant reminder. The next step seemed obvious. If talking on the phone led nowhere, then someone had to show up in person. A visit to the HOA office might clear things up. At the very least, it would force a real conversation, instead of repeating lines from a script. The office was located near the entrance of the new neighborhood, in a building that looked more like a sales center than anything else. Clean windows, fresh paint, perfectly trimmed grass. Everything about it felt carefully controlled. Inside, the air was cool and quiet. A person behind the desk smiled politely but stiffly. When the farm was mentioned, the smile faded just a little. The family explained again that the land had never been part of the neighborhood. They brought copies of old deeds and maps. They pointed to dates that went back decades before the first house was built. The response was calm, but firm. According to the HOA, new boundary surveys had been approved. According to their documents, the farm fell under the association's authority. Whether the family agreed or not did not matter. The rules applied to everyone within the boundary. When asked how such a change could happen without notice, the answer was vague. Legal processes, updated filings, standard procedure. Nothing illegal, according to them. The family left the office feeling unheard. The papers they brought were barely glanced at. The conversation felt one-sided, like the decision had already been made long before anyone spoke. Back at the farm, another letter arrived within days. This one included a deadline. Payment was expected by a specific date. Failure to comply would lead to further action. The language was colder now, less welcoming, more threatening. The family began to realize that the HOA was not just asking for money. It was testing how far it could go. Soon after, small things started happening. A notice appeared about noise complaints. According to the HOA, early morning equipment use violated community standards. Another notice mentioned vehicles parked in non-approved areas, referring to tractors and trailers visible from nearby homes. The family was stunned. These were not random complaints. They were detailed and specific. Someone was watching the farm closely. They tried to ignore it at first. Farming had always been loud and visible. That was not going to change. But the notices kept coming. Each one carried the same message: comply or face consequences. Neighbors began acting differently too. Some avoided eye contact. Others watched from their porches as machines moved across the fields. A few spoke up, asking when the farm planned to clean things up or reduce the smell. The words were polite, but the meaning was clear. The family answered calmly. The farm was legal. The farm was older than the neighborhood. The farm was not going anywhere. Still, the pressure grew. One afternoon, a representative from the HOA showed up unannounced. They stood at the edge of the driveway, clipboard in hand, taking notes. They mentioned rule violations. They spoke about compliance timelines. They acted as if they already had authority. The family asked them to leave. The visit shook them more than the letters had. This was no longer paperwork. It was personal. That night, the family sat together and talked longer than usual. They discussed what would happen if the HOA continued pushing. They talked about fines, legal costs, and stress. They talked about how much the farm meant to them, not just financially, but emotionally. Walking away was never an option. They decided it. It's time to get professional advice. A local attorney agreed to review the situation. Boxes of documents were brought in. Deeds, tax records, land surveys, and old agreements were spread across a table. The attorney listened carefully, asking questions that no one from the HOA ever had. After hours of reviewing paperwork, the attorney looked up and said something that brought a small sense of relief. Based on the documents, the farm appeared to be completely separate from the HOA. There was no clear legal path that placed the land under association control. But there was a catch. Challenging the HOA would not be quick or easy. Associations often relied on intimidation and persistence. Even if they were wrong, they expected most people to give in rather than fight. The family understood that now. Within a week, Joe sent another notice. This one included a growing balance and mentioned potential liens. The language was carefully chosen. It's meant to scare without crossing obvious lines. The attorney advised the family not to pay anything. Paying even once could be used as proof of agreement. Instead, a formal response would be sent, stating clearly that the farm rejected the HOA's authority. The letter was written carefully and sent by certified mail. It included copies of key documents and a firm statement of position. The response from the HOA came faster than expected. They rejected the claim, according to them. The matter was settled. The farm was part of the association. Continued refusal would lead to legal enforcement. The tone left no room for discussion. Around this time, family noticed more complaints being filed. Small things were suddenly problems. Dust from the road, a trailer parked overnight, animals visible from certain angles. Each issue was documented and added to the growing file. It became clear that the HOA is building a case. The family felt frustration, but also clarity. This was not about keeping a nice neighborhood. It was about control over land that did not belong to them. The attorney confirmed their suspicion. If the HOA succeeded, it could set a dangerous example. Other farms and older properties could face the same treatment. The idea that the farm could be forced to follow rules written for suburban homes felt unreal. Limits on noise, restrictions on animals, approval required for changes. It would make normal farming impossible. As weeks passed, local rumors started spreading. Some neighbors believed the farm was refusing to cooperate. Others heard the HOA planned to take action soon. The story grew with each retelling. The family tried to stay focused. They worked the land. They cared for animals. They reminded themselves why they were fighting. Then one evening, a thick envelope arrived. Inside was a formal notice stating that the HOA intended to pursue legal remedies if payment and compliance were not achieved. It was the clearest threat yet. The family read it in silence. This was no longer a misunderstanding. It was a challenge. They knew the road ahead would be difficult. Time, money, and patience would be tested. But they also knew one thing for certain. The farm had stood long before the HOA existed, and it would not surrender quietly. The days grew longer and heavier as the conflict continued. Each morning began with routine farm work, but the tension followed like a shadow across the fields. The family could no longer ignore that someone was watching every move. Complaints arrived faster, notices piled higher, and each step felt like walking into a trap. One morning, a neighbor approached at the edge of the property. The visitor was polite but had questions about the farm's animals and equipment. It was obvious the person had been sent or influenced by the HOA. Their words were careful, friendly yet firm, hinting at the rules that were supposedly being broken. The family answered calmly, explaining that the farm was older than the neighborhood, that nothing was being done incorrectly. The neighbor nodded politely, but the tension in their eyes revealed unease. Soon after, family noticed unusual activity near the edges of their land. Cars would slowly drive by and pause, sometimes taking pictures of barns or livestock. At first, it felt minor. Then it became persistent, almost like a survey of the farm. It was a reminder that the HOA had not forgotten or retreated. They were building evidence, documenting complaints, preparing for a confrontation. The family met daily in the farmhouse, reviewing the situation. The kitchen table, scarred from decades of work, became a war room of sorts. Letters were spread out, legal advice discussed, and strategies considered. The weight of responsibility fell heavily, but each member understood that yielding meant losing more than money. It meant giving up the life they had built over generations. The attorney suggested documenting everything meticulously. Each interaction, each visit, each letter should be kept on record. Photographs of the property, timestamps of complaints. Copies of the deeds and historical surveys all would be necessary to defend the farm. This advice, though overwhelming, gave the family clarity. They were not helpless. They had proof and history on their side. Days passed with small victories and mounting challenges. Equipment had to be moved in ways that minimized complaints. Animals were checked more frequently, and every action on the farm was carefully considered. It was exhausting, but necessary. The family learned patience and precision. Farming had always required hard work. But this battle demanded more than strength, it demanded strategy. Then one morning, a large envelope arrived with a more serious tone. It was a formal fine notice listing alleged violations from weeks past. Dust from plowed fields, tractors parked near the road, and livestock visibility were cited. Each point was recorded in detail, as if the farm's daily life had become a courtroom drama. The family read it silently, absorbing the reality that the HOA was willing to escalate, that small details could be twisted into evidence against them. That night, discussions grew longer. The family debated next steps, weighing risks and resources. Should they respond immediately or wait for the next move? Could the matter be resolved without a court battle, or was confrontation inevitable? Despite uncertainty, one thing was clear. The farm could not be forced into rules, meant for a suburban street. Local media started to notice the tension. A reporter called, asking for a statement about the ongoing dispute. The family, wary of exposure, but aware of the opportunity, gave a brief explanation. They spoke about the farm's history, its independence, and the sense of unfairness. The reporter's questions were gentle but probing, trying to capture the human side of the conflict rather than the legal details. The story began to spread quietly, drawing attention to an unusual battle between a long-standing farm and an HOA. Meanwhile, the HOA continued its tactics. Notices became more frequent, and a representative appeared again without warning. This time, the person walked along the driveway, clipboard in hand, checking fences, vehicles, and animals. The family politely but firmly asked them to leave. The representative insisted they had authority and legal standing. The conversation was polite in words but tense in meaning. It was clear the HOA intended to intimidate. The family decided to take further steps with their attorney. Historical documents were carefully reviewed again. Old tax records, photographs, maps, and surveys were cross-checked. Each piece of evidence confirmed the farm's independence. The attorney prepared letters, not just denying the HOA's authority, but challenging their claims outright. Legal action, if necessary, would be mounted with a strong foundation. Friends and community members began to take notice as well. Those who had lived in the area for years understood the farm's history and sympathized with its plight. Some offered support, advice, and even small help on the farm. Their encouragement gave the family strength, reminding them that they were not alone in this struggle. As weeks turned into months, the pressure did not lessen. Notices, fines, and visits continued. But the family also grew more organized. Documentation was complete. Every action was noted. Every communication responded to thoughtfully. What once felt like chaos slowly transformed into a plan of defense. The farm was still theirs, and now they had a strategy to protect it. One afternoon, a neighbor suggested mediation. It was an attempt to resolve issues quietly, without the attention of courts or lawyers. The family considered it, but ultimately, their attorney advised caution. Mediation could imply agreement, or acceptance of the HOA's authority. The risk was too high. The farm could not yield, even partially, because the principles at stake went beyond a single conversation. Throughout it all, the farm continued to function. Animals were fed, fields were plowed, and crops tended. Life carried on, but under a shadow. Each sunrise brought labor and worry, but also resilience. The family's determination became more visible with each passing day. They were fighting not just for themselves, but for the principle of ownership and independence. The situation reached a turning point when the HOA attempted to involve local authorities. Complaints were made about noise, parking, and land use. Police officers visited the farm, asked questions, and left. There were no violations found. It became evident that the HOA was using every tool at its disposal to pressure the family into submission. The family responded with calm, persistence. Every interaction was polite, every letter answered, every document ready. Their attorney remained a constant guide, offering reassurance that the law was on their side. Confidence grew alongside frustration, creating a balance that kept them focused. Local media coverage increased slightly, bringing more attention to the unusual story. Community members began attending informal meetings, sharing knowledge, and expressing support. Letters and emails of encouragement arrived. It became clear that the farm struggle had sparked a quiet movement in the neighborhood, reminding everyone that fairness and history mattered. As the weeks passed, the family realized that the battle was no longer just legal. It was personal. It was about pride, dignity, and the life they had built. They were determined not to allow external forces to redefine their existence. Every visit from an HOA representative, every letter, every fine became fuel for their resolve. They would protect the farm, its history, and its future, no matter the cost. Finally, one quiet evening, after a long day of labor, the family gathered around the kitchen table once again. The letters were stacked neatly in one corner, documents spread across the surface. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the farmhouse. There was exhaustion in their bodies, but a sense of purpose in their minds. They had weathered intimidation, misunderstanding, and pressure. They had held their ground, though the conflict was far from over. A quiet confidence settled over the family. They knew the HOA was persistent, but they also knew that preparation, documentation, and determination could withstand the pressure. The farm had faced challenges before storms, equipment failures, economic uncertainty, and had survived. This, too, would be met with resilience. As night fell and the farm settled into darkness, the family remained alert but resolute. They had learned that standing up for what was right required patience, courage, and unwavering belief in one's own history and truth. The farm was theirs, and no letters or fines could change that. Every tree, fence, and field held a story of generations. Every dawn brought work, hope, and the quiet knowledge that they would not be moved easily. The HOA might have thought the farm would bend under pressure, but the family had made a silent promise. They would fight for their land, their legacy, and their right to exist as they always had. No matter how long it took, no matter how hard the struggle, the farm would remain free and intact, just as it had been for decades. The tension reached a new level as the family prepared for what felt like an inevitable confrontation. Every day they checked letters, tracked notices, and reviewed legal documents. The farm had become a battlefield, but they refused to let it take the life and peace from their home. Each decision was measured, each step calculated. They understood that reacting emotionally could give the HOA an advantage. They would not allow that. The attorney scheduled a meeting to review all the historical records again. Old maps were spread across the table, each line and mark examined carefully. Deeds dating back decades were highlighted, showing the property boundaries clearly. Tax records confirmed the farm's independent status. Photos from long ago captured the farmhouse, barns, and fields standing alone before any of the neighboring houses existed. Every piece of evidence built a strong case. "Nothing here belongs to the HOA," the attorney said, leaning over the table. "They are overreaching. If this goes to court, we have every reason to expect a favorable outcome." The family felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. Relief because the law was clearly on their side. Anxiety because even knowing they were right did not make the coming fight easy. Court battles were slow, stressful, and costly. And the HOA had already shown that it would use every tool available to pressure them. The first official step toward legal action came in the form of a notice from the HOA, stating that they were prepared to take the matter to court if the fees and compliance were not met. It was a challenge, but the family was ready. Their attorney advised them not to respond with emotion. Every letter, every notice would be documented. Every step accounted for. As the family prepared for potential court hearings, a reporter from the local newspaper arrived. The family, still cautious, invited them to see the farm. They walked the reporter across the fields, showing barns, animals, and the equipment used for daily work. The reporter listened carefully, asking questions about the history of the farm, the family's connection to the land. And the letters from the HOA, the article that followed, told the story of a farm standing up to an overreaching homeowners association. It highlighted the human side of the conflict, showing the daily life of a family that had worked the land for generations. Local readers were intrigued. Some expressed support. Others debated the issue, but the story was out. It helped the family feel that they were not fighting alone. Meanwhile, the HOA began filing more formal complaints. They referenced minor issues, some exaggerated, some imagined, creating a paper trail that seemed designed to intimidate. The family remained steady, documenting each complaint and comparing it against historical evidence and legal advice. Every notice was filed, every visit noted, every interaction carefully recorded. It became clear that the HOA was preparing for a full legal confrontation, expecting the family to falter under pressure. The first court date was set. The family arrived early, nerves present but managed. Their attorney had prepared them thoroughly. They knew what evidence to present, how to speak clearly, and how to avoid pitfalls. The courtroom was quiet, the air filled with anticipation. The HOA's representatives sat on the other side, confident, their documents neatly organized. The hearing began with introductions and procedural explanations. Then, the attorney for the family presented the evidence. Each map, deed, and photograph was introduced. The family watched as decades of history were laid out, demonstrating the farm's independence. The court listened carefully, asking questions for clarity. The facts were undeniable. The HOA's attorney attempted to argue that new surveys had changed the boundaries, that the farm fell under the association's rules. But when pressed, they could not produce evidence of legal annexation. The family's historical records clearly showed that the land had never been incorporated. Documents, old maps, and records were on their side. During the hearing, emotions ran high for both sides. The family remained composed, understanding that their behavior would affect perception. The attorney guided them, reminding them to speak calmly, stick to facts, and show the human side of their story. The struggle was not just about rules and fees, it was about a family defending a life, built over generations. After presenting all evidence, the court took time to review and consider. The family left with cautious optimism. They had made their case clearly, but decisions often took time. During the wait, life on the farm continued. Animals still needed care, crops needed tending, and fields required attention. The family kept moving, balancing daily responsibilities with the tension of awaiting a decision. Finally, the court ruling arrived. The judge's decision was decisive. The farm was recognized as independent, legally separate from the HOA. Any claims of authority by the association were invalid. Fees, fines, and compliance requirements were dismissed. The HOA's attempt to control the farm was denied. The news brought relief and celebration. The family stood on the porch, looking across the fields that had been the source of so much stress and determination. The sun set over the land, casting long shadows across the barns and fields. For the first time in months, a sense of peace settled over the property. The HOA's leadership faced consequences as well. Legal fees and the failure of their claims created tension within the organization. Some members resigned, others stepped down, and policies were reviewed to prevent similar overreach in the future. The story of the farm became a quiet lesson in standing firm, knowing history, and defending what is right. Local media covered the resolution, highlighting not only the legal outcome, but the human story. Readers were drawn to the perseverance of the family, their connection to the land, and the principle of standing up for one's rights. Support came in letters, emails, and visits from neighbors who admired the family's courage and dedication. The farm returned to its rhythm. But with a renewed sense of pride, the family understood the value of preparation, documentation, and persistence. They had faced intimidation and pressure and emerged stronger. Each sunrise brought work, hope, and a quiet knowledge that the farm's independence was secure. Looking back, the family reflected on the journey. The conflict had tested patience, resilience, and unity. It had revealed weaknesses in communication and the importance of knowing one's history. But above all, it had shown that standing firm, with facts and integrity, could overcome intimidation and overreach. The farm's story became part of the community's memory. Generations before had built it with care and hard work. This chapter, though stressful, became a new layer in its history. It reminded everyone that respect for property, history, and fairness mattered, and that sometimes ordinary people needed to take extraordinary steps to protect what they valued most. As the night settled and the farmhouse lights glowed warmly, the family felt a quiet satisfaction. They had faced one of the most stressful periods in their lives, and yet they had not faltered. The farm had stood its ground, as had they. Life would continue, with work to do, seasons to follow, and a legacy to maintain. But the knowledge that they had protected their land and their way of life brought a deep sense of accomplishment and peace. The battle was over, and the farm remained free, as it had been for generations. After the court ruling, a calm began to settle over the farm, but it was not the calm of surrender. It was the calm of victory earned through hard work, perseverance, and unity. The family moved through their days with a sense of freedom, but also with a careful awareness of how close they had come to losing the land that had been in their care for generations. The first mornings after the ruling were quiet in a different way. There were no letters to read, no fines to calculate, no representatives to argue with. The fields were open, the animals roamed without scrutiny, and machinery could be used freely again. Each sunrise felt like a gift, not just because of the light, but because it marked a return to normalcy, a life shaped by choice rather than imposition. The family celebrated quietly, knowing that the fight had been more than legal, it had been personal. It had tested their resolve, patience, and belief in themselves. They gathered around the kitchen table, sharing stories and reflections, laughing quietly at moments that had seemed terrifying at the time. It was a moment to remember, not just as a victory, but as proof of what could be achieved when standing firm in the face of pressure. Word of the resolution spread through the local community. Neighbors, both old and new, came by to offer congratulations, express admiration, and even apologize for the gossip and misunderstandings that had occurred during the conflict. The family welcomed them, knowing that these visits were not just about the past struggle, but also about strengthening bonds that had been strained. Local media covered the final outcome, portraying the story as a triumph of persistence, integrity, and respect for history. Articles highlighted the family's dedication, the documentation they had gathered, and their calm yet firm approach to confrontation. The narrative resonated with many readers, reminding them that standing up for what is right often requires courage and patience. The HOA, facing the reality of a failed claim, underwent its own changes. Leadership was reviewed, some members resigned, and policies were reconsidered to prevent similar overreach in the future. The organization had learned that authority could not be enforced through intimidation alone, and that communities needed to respect the history and rights of their neighbors. While the family felt no joy in seeing others struggle, there was a sense of closure in knowing that fairness had prevailed. The family used the experience as a lesson for the future. They reviewed their records, reinforced their knowledge of property rights, and prepared for potential challenges with careful planning. While they hoped that nothing like this would happen again, they understood that being proactive was part of protecting what was theirs. Knowledge, documentation, and unity had proven essential, and they were determined to maintain that awareness going forward. Daily life on the farm resumed with a renewed sense of purpose. Crops were tended, animals fed, and fields worked with the same dedication as always, but with a deeper appreciation for the freedom to do so without interference. Each task carried the weight of history, responsibility, and gratitude. The farm was more than land. It was a living testament to generations of care and hard work. Conversations around the farmhouse reflected on what had been learned. The family spoke of the importance of patience, the value of community support, and the necessity of standing firm when principles are at stake. Younger members learned the lessons of history firsthand, understanding that resilience was not just about physical strength, but also about courage, knowledge, and integrity. Even as life returned to routine, small reminders of the battle remained. Letters were stored in carefully labeled files, photographs were preserved, and documents organized meticulously. These were not trophies, but tools for preparedness. A record of a time when the family had been tested and had emerged stronger. They served as a guide, a reassurance that knowledge and planning could protect them from future overreach. The experience also shaped how the family engaged with the surrounding neighborhood. They reached out to neighbors, sharing stories, educating about property rights, and emphasizing respect for individual history. These efforts built stronger relationships and fostered a sense of mutual understanding. While disagreements could arise, the family knew that communication and transparency were far better tools than confrontation. Life continued in cycles dictated by the land and seasons, as it always had. The farm maintained its rhythm, planting, tending, harvesting, and preparing for each new challenge. Yet beneath this routine, there was a deeper awareness of the value of independence, the significance of history, and the power of unity in the face of adversity. Every sunrise carried the reassurance that their home and livelihood were secure. The family occasionally reflected on the stress and tension of the months when the HOA tried to assert control. It was not easy to relive those moments, but it was necessary to understand the depth of their victory. They had faced letters, fines, intimidation, and visits, yet remained composed and strategic. They had consulted professionals, gathered evidence, and stayed united. That experience, though difficult, had strengthened them in ways that nothing else could. Visitors to the farm now noticed a quiet confidence. The family moved through their days with calm determination, aware that challenges could come, but also confident in their ability to respond. The story of the farm had become part of the community's consciousness, a quiet example of standing up for what is right, knowing history, and protecting one's own. Over time, the farmhouse and fields returned fully to the rhythm of normal life. Animals grazed freely, machinery operated as needed, and the land reflected the care and attention it had always received. Yet the story of the struggle lingered in conversation, in memory, and in the careful documentation that had ensured victory. It was a part of the farm's history now, a chapter that highlighted the importance of courage, preparation, and unwavering commitment to what one values most. The family also began sharing their story more broadly, hoping to inspire others who might face similar challenges. They spoke to local groups about property rights, persistence, and the value of maintaining careful records. Their experience became a teaching moment, emphasizing that ordinary people could stand firm against unfair pressure when they were informed, organized, and united. Even as time passed, the memory of the struggle remained vivid. Every letter, every visit, every complaint had been a test of patience and resolve. But the outcome proved that standing firm, knowing one's history, and responding thoughtfully could protect not just land, but a way of life. The farm, once threatened by an external authority, was now more secure, more respected, and more cherished than ever. As the sun set over the fields, the family gathered on the porch. The land stretched out before them, open and free. The barns, fences, and trees stood as silent witnesses to the struggles overcome. They reflected quietly, not just on the past months, but on the decades of care, work, and love that had shaped this farm. The experience had been hard, but it had also reaffirmed the strength of family, the importance of history, and the power of standing up for what is right. The farm would continue to thrive. Seasons would change, crops would grow, animals would need care, and new challenges would arise. But the family knew that no external force could take away what they had built with their own hands, defended with their own courage, and preserved with unwavering commitment. The land was theirs, as it had always been, and as it always would be.